He got kicked out of his own cafe because they thought he was just a delivery guy. John Cena stood silently staring through the foggy glass door. His jacket clung to his shoulders, damp from the morning drizzle. The faded logo on his borrowed uniform looked foreign now, like it belonged to someone else. He stepped inside. No greeting, no nod, just tired eyes scanning him like he didn't belong. A young hostess glanced at him, then muttered flatly, "We don't serve delivery drivers." "Where are you watching this from?" "Seattle." "Houston, somewhere quiet in Ohio." Drop it in the comments below and stay with us because what happens next will quietly break your heart. And maybe rebuild something too. Cena and Company wasn't some high-end bistro. It started as a warm corner in a cold world. John Cena's way of giving back. After years of wrestling, acting, investing, and working behind the scenes, he quietly opened this cafe in a small neighborhood off the main road. No press release, no flashy launch, just a sign that read, "Good coffee, honest food, no judgment." And for a while it stayed true. But lately something fell off. A drop in return customers, a rise in 5-star Yelp reviews filled with polished photos, but hollow praise. Most of all, a handful of 1-star complaints that all said the same thing in different words. I was turned away. Cena didn't want to believe it. Maybe people misunderstood. Maybe his staff were overwhelmed. But that morning, as he stood outside the glass door pretending to be a delivery guy, he decided to find out for himself. The rain had slowed. The windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Cena adjusted his cap, checked his old beat-up delivery bag, and walked in. No one looked up. The bell above the door didn't chime. It had been broken for months, though no one fixed it. The walls still bore the same photos of smiling staff, charity events, and a framed $1 bill. But it all felt quieter. He stepped up to the counter. The young woman at the hostess stand glanced up briefly, then looked back down at her phone. She didn't ask if he needed help. She didn't ask his name, just pointed toward the door. "We're not accepting walk-ins right now," she said flatly. "Especially not delivery drivers." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He simply nodded, backed away, and walked out. Not a single person said goodbye. Outside, the wind carried the scent of coffee and rosemary potatoes. The smell used to mean comfort. Now it made his stomach turn. John Cena stood beneath the faded sign bearing his cafe's name, a name he hadn't used publicly in months. Not because he was ashamed, but because he thought the place could stand on its own. Turns out, without care, even good places rot quietly. He watched the door for a moment longer. People passed by without a glance. Inside, someone laughed, a sharp contrast to the dull ache forming in his chest. Was this really his cafe? Was this what it had become? He stepped back to the curb. A drip of water slid down his cheek. Maybe from his hair, maybe not. Either way, it stung. He hadn't always been the owner. Decades ago, before fame, before anything, John Cena worked gigs just like this. Carrying deliveries upstairs, getting doors slammed in his face, being told to wait outside. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible. That memory had built this cafe. And now it was happening again. Not to him, but to people who looked like him once upon a time. Back in the day, he swore he'd open a place where tired people could sit down, no matter how they looked or what they earned. No one would be judged for wearing paint-stained pants or carrying a backpack instead of a briefcase. A cup of coffee would be enough to earn a smile. That was the dream. But somewhere along the way, it seemed the dream had changed. As he stood there, Cena noticed someone sitting at the sidewalk bench, an older man with cracked glasses and a shopping cart beside him. He sipped from a thermos and looked up. Their eyes met. The man smiled, not in recognition, but in solidarity. Cena gave a small nod. He didn't know him, but he knew the feeling. He looked back at the cafe one more time. The glass door still fogged from the inside, but now it felt like a wall. Not made of glass, but of something colder. Assumption. Exclusion. Apathy. That night, he didn't sleep. Not really. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at a shoebox full of old delivery receipts, crumpled notes, and a pair of worn-out work shoes he hadn't touched in years. Then, without hesitation, he opened the lid and began laying everything out: jacket, cap, bag, shoes. Tomorrow he wouldn't be John Cena the actor, not the owner, not the philanthropist. Tomorrow he'd be invisible. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way to truly see. Most men would have gone home after that. Maybe sent an angry email. Maybe fired someone over the phone. But not him. Not John Cena. He didn't rise by rushing, and he sure wasn't about to start now. That quiet moment outside the café, standing in the drizzle, watching strangers laugh inside a place built from his bones, it didn't just sting. It woke something up in him. Something slow, something steady. The next morning, he dressed like memory. Same scuffed shoes from years ago, same canvas jacket patched at the elbows. He adjusted the brim of his delivery cap and stepped into the alley behind the café. The same alley where back in the early days, he'd unload boxes himself because no one else would. The staff door was still there. Slightly rusted now, but unlocked just as he'd asked them to always keep it. For the late ones, he used to say. For the hungry, for the tired. Leave it open. And so it was. Inside the air shifted. Warm, heavy, familiar. The scent of coffee, grease, and something else. Something rich. Too rich. Not soup of the day rich. Not sandwich with a side of pickles rich. This was white wine sauce rich. Butter seared, herb tossed, truffle shaved rich. Cena paused near the kitchen doorway, tucked behind a stack of delivery trays. No one noticed him. No one ever really looked at the guy with a bag over his shoulder. He was invisible just like old times. The kitchen bustled. Steam danced above pots. A pan clattered. Laughter spilled out, casual and sharp. He spotted 3 line cooks gathered near the prep counter, plating something that shimmered under melted butter. Salmon, thick, clean cuts. Next to it, risotto finished with shaved truffle. He knew the smell. He'd smelled it in the kind of restaurants where a plate costs more than a week's groceries. But this wasn't one of those places. Not supposed to be. His cafe sold eggs, toast, hearty stews. Food you could afford and feel proud eating. This wasn't on any menu. He moved slowly past the kitchen through a narrow hall where the staff lockers used to be. That's when he saw her. Sarah. Mid-20s, hair tucked behind one ear, apron clean but frayed. She sat on an overturned milk crate, eating quietly from a plastic container. Rice, boiled vegetables, homemade, a paper napkin folded neatly on her lap. Around her, the noise of the kitchen carried on like she wasn't there. And maybe to them she wasn't. But Cena watched the way she paused mid-bite to check a message on her phone. Her face sank, then straightened. The phone went back into her pocket and she kept eating. No fuss. No noise. Just then Louise passed by. The janitor. Late 50s maybe. Hard to tell. His walk had that slow strength older men carry when they've worked their whole life without anyone ever asking if they needed help. He nodded at Cena, then moved toward the mop closet. On the way, he gently picked up a fallen napkin near Sarah's feet and dropped it in the bin without a word. She smiled at him. He didn't smile back, but he gave her a slight pat on the shoulder. And in that second, just a second, Cena saw more honesty in that gesture than in any quarterly report he'd read the past year. He kept walking. In the break room, Carla, the floor manager, sat with 2 others. They laughed over coffee and opened what looked like takeout boxes, except the food inside matched what was being cooked in the back. Truffle. Salmon. Roast duck. Not for customers. Not even for sale. For them. On the café's dime. On his dime. Cena's fingers curled slightly around the strap of his delivery bag. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He walked past them like he didn't see, didn't hear, didn't know. It wasn't time yet. He wasn't there to confront. He was there to. The undercover owner, John Cena. Out front, he watched a middle-aged man in work boots walk up to the counter. The hostess barely looked at him before shaking her head. "We're full right now," she said, though 3 tables stood empty by the window. The man nodded, awkward, turned back toward the door. And just before he left, Cena noticed Sarah again. This time behind the counter, sliding a cup of coffee discreetly into a to-go tray and slipping it toward the door after the man. He didn't see it. But John Cena did. In a world that was starting to look sharp-edged and selfish, Sarah and Louise were still soft corners. Quiet ones. The kind you almost miss unless you're paying attention. He stepped back into the kitchen hallway just as Louise was finishing up near the walk-in fridge. Cena watched him wipe down a shelf with care, then take a small container of leftover stew and set it on a crate near the back door with a handwritten label. Free. Take if hungry. Then he walked away. No announcements, no applause. Just kindness done in silence. And right then, John Cena knew, if there was still anything good left in his cafe, it didn't come from the menu. It came from two people no one ever seemed to notice. But he had noticed. And now he was going to watch more closely. Because somewhere beyond that mop closet and break room laughter, something darker was cooking. And it wasn't just the truffle oil. Understand. The good souls, John Cena. Some truths don't hit you like a storm. They creep in like a slow leak. Quiet, steady, and dangerous. That was how the next realization came to John Cena. Not through shouting. Not through confrontation. But through a clipboard. It was hanging beside the hostess stand, tucked just behind a half-used stack of menus, nearly hidden. If he hadn't bent down to tie his shoe at that moment, an old habit he never outgrew, he might have missed it. But he saw it. A clipboard yellowed and curling at the corners. And on it, a handwritten list. At first glance, it looked like notes, maybe shifts or table assignments. But it wasn't. It was a list of people. Or more precisely, types of people. Drivers crossmark. Construction boots crossmark. Tourists with backpacks crossmark. Senior discounts crossmark. No tips crossmark. Each had a red X beside it. Some were circled. Others underlined twice and scribbled at the bottom in smaller print. Seat only if necessary. Watch for table turnover. Cena's chest sank. He stood slowly, looked around, but no one paid him any mind. Just another delivery guy. He reached out, gently flipped the page. Same format. Different day. It wasn't a mistake. It was a system. He stepped back, trying to breathe through the tightening in his chest. For a moment, he wasn't sure if it was anger or something deeper. Shame, maybe. Not for what was written, but for not having seen it sooner. He moved toward the side of the counter where the morning rush had thinned out. Sarah passed by holding a tray with two mismatched mugs. She looked tired, more than usual. Cena noticed how she took a deep breath before greeting a table near the back. Two older women, one in a church hat, the other wearing oxygen tubing. Sarah bent slightly, smiled gently, and refilled their tea without being asked. No tips likely coming from that table. No problem. She didn't seem to care. But Carla did. Carla watched Sarah from the pass, arms crossed, expression flat. When Sarah returned to the counter, Cena overheard her whisper, sharp and low. Don't waste time on tables that don't pay, Sarah. Save the sweetness for the ones that matter. Sarah didn't argue. Just nodded. But her hand shook slightly as she poured the next coffee. Cena turned away. His eyes caught movement near the entrance. A man had just walked in. Tall, lean, dressed in a paint-stained hoodie and work boots. Hands rough, eyes hopeful. He stepped forward, smiled politely, asked for a seat. The hostess didn't even pretend to check. Just shook her head. We're full right now, she said, though 3 tables stood empty by the window. He hesitated, glanced behind her, then looked down. Okay, he said quietly. No problem. And walked back out into the cold. Sarah watched him leave. John Cena did too. 10 minutes later, another customer arrived. Khaki slacks. Pressed shirt. Bluetooth in one ear. A firm handshake and a too loud laugh. He was welcomed warmly. Seated immediately. Not only that, but Carla herself brought the menu, asked if he'd like sparkling water, told him about the chef special. Something not even on the board. Cena stepped into the shadowed hallway again, needing space to think. That's when he passed Louise. Kneeling by a floor grate with a wrench in hand, the old man wiped sweat from his brow, looked up. "Leaky again," he said simply. "Might be the seal." Cena didn't respond. Not right away. He just nodded slowly, eyes distant. "Yeah," he murmured. "Might be more than just that." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Louise returned to tightening the bolt, like he'd done 1,000 times. Quiet work. Honest work. No one clapped. No one cared. But the floor stopped leaking because of him. John Cena moved back toward the prep counter. On his way, he passed the fridge and caught a whiff. Truffle oil again. Sweet. Too rich. Too wrong. He knew what came next. He knew what it meant. This wasn't just a cafe losing its way. This was something more deliberate. He stopped by the employee bulletin board. Someone had scrawled a note in big red marker. "Waste is loss. Control portions. Know your worth." It looked like motivation. But it wasn't. It was a mask. Behind those words was a mindset. One that no longer welcomed the tired, the unseen, the people this cafe was built for. As he stood there, Sarah passed again. This time, she carried a sandwich wrapped in paper. She slipped quietly toward the back door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. Curious, Cena followed at a distance. Through the side window, he saw her hand the sandwich to a young man in a delivery uniform. He looked surprised, grateful. She said something Cena couldn't hear, then smiled. A small, tired smile. The boy took the sandwich, nodded, and walked away, head held just a bit higher. Sarah turned and re-entered the cafe. Didn't say a word to anyone. No one noticed she was gone. But John Cena had noticed again. And that's when it hit him. Kindness hadn't left his cafe. It was still here. Hidden. Quiet. Tired. Held up by 2 hands. One pair young and overworked, the other calloused and old. But it was being smothered. Slowly. Quietly. And the people doing it, they weren't making mistakes. They were following orders. He didn't sleep much that night. Truth be told, he hadn't really slept in days. Not since the first customer was turned away. Not since the taste of buttered salmon filled a cafe that was never meant to serve luxury. Cena lay in the dim glow of his apartment, wrapped in the kind of quiet that only city nights offer. Heavy, unmoving. Almost too still to be comforting. On the coffee table sat his old laptop, lid open, screen half lit. Next to it a small notebook. He didn't write much anymore. But that night he did. Not paragraphs. Just lines. Names. Sights. Smells. Moments. Sarah. Louise. Carla. The clipboard. The sandwich handed out back. The truffle oil. He listed them all slow and steady like building a case. Not in court but in conscience. He'd built a cafe for people who had nowhere else to sit. And now it was becoming a place that looked right past them. That wasn't just drift. That was design. And so, sometime around 3:15 in the morning, John Cena opened a browser tab and typed in 3 words he never thought he'd need. Covert camera equipment. The search results blinked back at him. Tiny lenses. Motion sensors. Wireless audio. Discreet. Affordable. Overnight shipping. He clicked fast. No hesitation. Trust was broken. He'd need proof now. Not assumptions. Not gut feelings. Proof. By mid-afternoon, the box arrived. Anonymous. Brown taped. No logos. John Cena opened it slowly, laying out each piece like a craftsman inspecting his tools. Cameras no bigger than a coin. Microphones the size of a pen tip. Battery packs. Velcro strips. Signal testers. It felt strange. Underhanded, even. But he wasn't doing this to catch someone for sport. He was doing this because people he trusted had turned his cafe into something it was never meant to be. And worse, they thought he'd never notice. The next morning, he returned in uniform again. The delivery cap pulled low. The jacket zipped just high enough to hide his face. the worn bag on his shoulder. He entered through the back as always, with the same silent nod to Louise, who was already sweeping the tile near the walk-in freezer. Cena gave a brief wave. Louise nodded back. Nothing more. It was enough. He moved with precision. No rush. Like someone who'd been doing it for years. In truth, he had. Just not this kind of work. He'd acted his way through tougher scenes. This wasn't acting now. This was memory and mission. One by one, the cameras were placed. A tiny lens behind the syrup shelf above the espresso machine. Another tucked into the corner vent near the employee lockers. One below the prep station angled toward the walk-in. A microphone beneath the break room table. Another under the counter near the POS system. All of it streamed silently to his phone. Every word. Every motion. He didn't watch obsessively. Not at first. He waited. Let the feed build over days. And what came through wasn't a scandal. Not in the Hollywood sense. No screaming matches. No chase scenes. Just patterns. Quiet ones. Predictable ones. Painful ones. Customers who looked like they worked with their hands were consistently turned away. Tourists with accents were charged extra. Seniors with discount cards were accidentally given cold coffee. Plates of expensive food appeared regularly in the staff room. Food never listed on the menu. Carla led most of it. Phil, the assistant manager, enabled the rest. And those under them, they followed suit. Not because they were bad, but because the culture allowed it. And in the middle of it all, Sarah and Louise. Two people who never seemed to speak much to anyone, but somehow still made the cafe feel human. Cena watched Sarah gently help a customer who didn't speak English. Pointing at the board, showing them the total with her fingers, smiling even when they left without tipping. He saw her wash dishes during someone else's shift. Not because she had to, but because the sink was piling up and no one else moved. He watched Louise find a crying teenager in the bathroom hallway. A boy, maybe 16, in a wrinkled hoodie. Phone clutched in both hands like a lifeline. Louise didn't ask what was wrong. Just handed him a paper towel, sat down on the bench nearby and waited. 20 minutes. Just waited. No one else even noticed the kid had been there. This was what the cafe used to be about. But the footage kept rolling, and the silence it captured said enough. There were jokes behind closed doors. A server whispering, "Put the tippers by the window." The rest near the restroom. Carla laughing about getting rid of the sad crowd. Before the weekend brunch rush, someone calling Louise Mr. Mop and tossing a towel at his feet. John Cena didn't flinch watching it. He'd flinched already the first time they turned him away. This was just confirmation. He let it collect day by day. Night by night. Each file backed up. Every moment labeled. He wasn't ready to act yet. Not until the picture was full. Not until it was undeniable. But one evening, something shifted. Cena watched from his apartment as the screen showed Phil, the assistant manager, calm, confident, loading boxes into his car. Not takeout. Not leftovers. Boxes labeled with handwritten tags. Prime cut. Wine reserve. Chef use only. He moved fast. Like he'd done it before. Checked over his shoulder. Trunk open. Trunk closed. Gone. That was the first time John Cena whispered to himself aloud. This isn't neglect. This is theft. And once you say it out loud, you can't unhear it. He sat back in his chair, the screen still glowing. His phone buzzed with a motion alert. Someone near the prep station. Probably another staff snack being slipped onto a private plate. He didn't check it right away. Just stared out the window down into the street. The city hadn't changed. Just his cafe. Just his people. Or maybe they'd changed long ago, and he'd only now begun to see it. He picked up the phone, tapped recordings, and created a new folder. He titled it simply, "For the Day I Return." And when that day came, it would not start with kindness. It would start with truth. Sunday morning. Brunch hour. The cafe buzzed with the usual hum, clinking cups, chatter, chairs sliding against tile. Then the door opened. The bell above it chimed. Someone had finally fixed it. And through that doorway stepped John Cena. Not in his delivery jacket this time. Not invisible. A simple black suit. Clean. Sharp. Unmistakable. Conversations slowed. Forks hovered. Carla froze behind the counter. Face draining of color. Phil dropped an espresso filter. Sarah, mid-step with a tray, nearly stumbled. Louise just leaned on his mop, eyes steady. Cena walked to the center of the room. Calm. Deliberate. Every eye followed him. He set his bag down, pulled out a small cord, and connected it to the café's digital board, the same one that usually flashed daily specials. The screen blinked. Then came the footage. Carla in the break room, laughing with truffle pasta on her plate. Phil loading boxes marked prime cut into his car. The hostess turning away an old man while 3 tables sat empty. The clipboard with red X's. Drivers, seniors, no tips. Then the audio. Carla's voice. Crisp, undeniable. We only serve the ones who matter. Drivers can wait. The room went silent. A woman at a corner table gasped. Another muttered, I knew it. Cena waited. Watched the truth sink in. Then he spoke. My name is John Cena. And this café is mine. Whispers rippled through the room. Some stunned. Some angry. He continued. Last week I walked in here dressed as a delivery driver. I was turned away at my own door. Not just me, every person who didn't fit your list. That's not what this place was built for. That's not why it exists. He turned toward Carla and Phil. You two decided who mattered and who didn't. You fed yourselves while turning people away hungry. That ends today. You're done here. Collect your things. You won't step in this café again. Carla's mouth opened. No words came. Phil just stared at the floor. Cena turned, his tone softening as he looked at Sarah. You showed kindness when no one else would. You slipped a cup of coffee to a man turned away. You kept the promise this café was founded on. Then to Louise. And you. You carried this place on your back in silence. Fixing what broke. Holding the door open for those no one else saw. You've been the soul of this café all along. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the master key, and placed it gently into Louise's calloused hand. From today, this café belongs to people like you. Louise shook his head, overwhelmed. I just clean floors, he whispered. Cena gave the faintest smile. No. You keep them steady. That's what matters. Sarah's eyes filled. She nodded silently. Around them, customers began to clap. Not loud at first, but steady. A slow rise. Some stood. Some simply smiled, tears in their eyes. The café, his café, breathed again. From that day forward, the menu changed. Gone were the truffle dishes, the luxury plates. Back were the stews, the sandwiches, the coffee that warmed you more than it impressed you. And under the specials board, one new line was written. One free meal a day for anyone who needs it. No announcement. No grand campaign. Just a promise. Weeks later, if you walked by in the evening, you might see John Cena sitting quietly in the corner. A simple cup of coffee in hand. Watching Sarah refill cups, Louise mop the floors. Not as the star. Not as the owner. Just as a man who once knew what it felt like to be unseen, and refused to let it happen here again. Narrator's voice. Dignity isn't built on money or fame. It's built on kindness. On who you let sit at your table. John Cena didn't just reclaim a café. He reminded us all of something simple. Everyone deserves a place to belong. Backhand index pointing right end screen callout. If you've ever been judged unfairly, you know how much this matters. Share this story. Subscribe for more. And never forget, kindness is louder than judgment.